And thanks for joining us for a Tax Practitioners Board webinar. My name is Ashley Dowsard and I'm joining you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I'd like to pay my respect to them and their cultures and elders past and present. To begin, I have a few housekeeping messages. First, you can access the slides in the platform today, or you can obtain a copy by visiting our Webinar Resources Hub at tpb.gov.au/webinar-hub. We'll also email you a copy of the slides after the webinar. Today's webinar counts towards your continuing professional education or CPE, and you can claim 1 hour for attending. In relation to claiming your CPE, we'll issue an attendance certificate to those of you staying on for the duration of the webinar. Let's look at what we'll cover today. We'll start with sharing some information about fraud and integrity across government payment programs. Next, we'll outline the objective of the task force, what we aim to achieve together, and share some recent data and insights that highlight the impact of the work so far. We'll also look at strategic prevention initiative, why the task force is important, and we'll let you know where you can get help if you need support or want to report concerns. From there, we'll dive into the TPB's role in the task force and how we contribute to strengthening integrity. We'll also talk about how tax practitioners can play a vital part in preventing fraud and protecting the system. To bring this to life, we'll share some real case studies that show risks and consequences of fraudulent behaviour. Finally, we'll open up the floor to questions, so keep them coming throughout the presentation. We have Andrew and Siobhan from our Law and Compliance team on hand to answer your questions as we go. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, TPB Chair Peter DeCure and National Disability Insurance Agency General Manager Kitsa Papadopoulos. Welcome to you both. Kitsa, over to you to get things started.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, everyone, and thanks for coming along today to hear about this topic. I'm Kitsa, so I'm a General Manager in the National Disability Insurance Agency, responsible for the Fraud Fusion Taskforce, which I'll tell you a bit more about, but also all of the agency's fraud and integrity and compliance functions. The NDIS is an enormous government program now. It's worth close to $50 billion a year. And as such, it has joined the ranks of many other government payment programs currently and in the past that have been susceptible to integrity vulnerabilities. We know that fraud against government payment programs is a long-standing issue. And it is something that we face in Centrelink, family daycare, childcare, the VET sector, and as I said, NDIS is joining that group of programs as a target for both opportunistic and also serious organised crime. A really important thing to understand, especially when it comes to the NDIS, is that the impact is not just financial. What we are really finding is serious safeguarding risks to people. So these are very vulnerable people who are having their lives really put at risk by some of the situations that they get into when they are targeted by fraudulent people. So the impact goes from that really personal side right through to this whole organisation, the whole community, and the whole of Australia, really. So today I'll tell you a little bit more about why we've responded to this through the Fraud Fusion Taskforce and how that's really helping all government agencies to work together. For all of us in government payment programs, including the NDIS, some of the things that we need to protect ourselves against include the risks of illegitimate or ghost entities. So that might, in the NDIS, be people who look like an NDIS participant on the records, but they may not be a real identity. We've also got real clients being made eligible for things that they shouldn't have been, for example, through falsified evidence about their disability. We've got funds being claimed when it was impossible for that to have actually happened. For example, if an NDIS participant is in jail or in hospital, but their provider continues to claim for their plan when they weren't really giving services. We've also got behaviour that affects the client being able to get what they're supposed to. For example, if the provider is claiming down from the person's plan at a much faster rate than they should, then they might get to the end of the year and they've got no money left in their plan for those necessary supports that they need every day. Multi-jurisdictional mischief is really common, meaning that when we find people doing the wrong thing in one government payment program, they are often doing the wrong thing in other programs as well. For example, a lot of what we'll talk about today is non-compliant providers in the NDIS are often also not compliant with their tax obligations. And finally, cyber vulnerabilities are really common to everyone these days and includes the risk of our sensitive data being shared inappropriately and illegally. In Australia, we have been increasingly recognising the size and shape of this threat, including just in the last month. We've had the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission release a report called Opening the Books, and it highlights that organised crime is evolving fast. It's a really big global business, and Australians are paying the price through taxpayers' money and government programs that are supposed to help Australians actually being targeted and corrupted, and that money flowing often out of Australia. And the ACIC has highlighted that a united response is vital, and we absolutely must work together. And we've got a quote there from Heather Cook, the CEO of the ACIC, straight out of that report that you can see on the slide. So in response to this threat that is common across government programs, the government set up the Fraud Fusion Taskforce in November 2022. So we've been working together for close to 4 years now. We started off with only 15 agencies, but we have grown to 24 agencies over that time. The Fraud Fusion Taskforce was initially responding to the big vulnerabilities in the NDIS at the time, but it was always recognised that it would support any sorts of integrity risks in any government payment programs of any of our members. So it is co-chaired by the NDIA and also the Services Australia, but we have increasingly been working on cases not just in NDIA and Services Australia programs, but through many of the programs of all of our members. We have some really, really important members, not least the Tax Practitioners Board, but also the ACIC, the Federal Police, the AFP, the Tax Office, and also Department of Health, Department of Social Services, and many others. We work together in two ways. One way is operational. So we have a stream of work that's all about doing casework together and intelligence sharing. But our second area of focus is strategic. So it's identifying those issues and vulnerabilities that are common across all of us, where we can work together and we can encourage whole of government reform, so that we can all be linked up, not working in silos, and making it easier to get it right and harder to get it wrong. This slide shows our growth journey. So you can see in the first box our original 15 members, and in the years since, we've had new members joining. So we had TPB joining last year, and just this year we've had a new department, which is Industry, Science and Resources, who actually give out a lot of grants. For example, they're interested in making sure there's high integrity in their grants. And we've also had the Office of the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations and the Fair Work Ombudsman most recently. This slide summarises those two streams of work, but it's a bit more specific in how we work together. So as I mentioned, we've got the strategic prevention stream of work as well as the intelligence and operations. They both have a committee. We have an IDC, an interdepartmental committee that sits along the top. And then we have various working groups targeted at ones about reform, like whole of government, big legislative reform, data sharing, and then we have an intelligence group around the Fraud Fusion Centre, which is an intelligence sharing operation within the ACIC. And then we have our operational working group, which makes decisions about our casework and prioritisation. On our operational side, it's absolutely been game-changing that we have been able to work together. Certainly from an NDIA point of view, we had a really quite small investigative and intelligence function, but we found ourselves really having a much increased volume of tip-offs coming through and a much increased demand on our teams to commence investigative activities. And so it was really transformational for us to be able to lean on our partners across Fraud Fusion Taskforce to be able to work together on investigations and benefit from that capability and capacity. And the same is true for other members of the task force, so Services Australia and many other agencies who are now cooperating on investigations. So overall, within the whole Fraud Fusion Task Force, we've got more than 635 investigations underway, and many of those are for targets who are joint targets across different agencies, so they're known to more than one program. In just the NDIS alone, we've disrupted close to 2,000 providers, which means we've been able to have them deregistered or banned from the NDIS, or we've been able to cut them off from receiving payments from the NDIA. We've executed more than 100 search warrants since the start of Fraud Fusion Task Force, and that's just the NDIA ones. There have been others targeted for other members of the FFT. And just in NDIS alone, we've reviewed more than 72,000 tip-offs since the start of Fraud Fusion Task Force. in November 2022. So we receive on average about 30,000 fraud tip-offs a year. This is an example here of a recent operation that we did. So you can find information about this operation in the press, and there was a media release from the AFP. So this operation targeted $50 million of Commonwealth fraudulent claiming through a coordinated week of action, coordinated through Fraud Fusion Taskforce. We also collaborated with a different group, which is called the Financial Crime and Money Laundering Working Group, on this national crackdown. For this, we had more than 75 investigators across multiple agencies working together. We executed 33 search warrants over just over a week. Many of these were pretty serious criminal networks claiming millions of dollars from government, and much of that is for services never delivered. We also had overlaps with other different types of fraud, for example, matters relevant to the ATO. We have a quote here from Jason Kennedy, who's our AFP commander, who is just emphasising the AFP's priority to crack down on these kind of frauds against government payment programs, and recognising the impact that it does have on the Australian community. Also, operationally, we work really close with our regulators, including the Tax Practitioners Board. And what we try to do is use those partnerships now to address the threat to our payment systems directly at the root cause. So if we find a tax agent who has been facilitating fraud against the NDIS, we now work closely with TPB as our partner to share intelligence and evidence about that person and support them to take the regulatory action they need to remove that person from the system forever as a tax agent, and then prevent them doing any further threat to the NDIS or any other government payment program. So this is a much more strengthened relationship that we have now compared to what we used to have. We will hear from Peter after this, who will tell you a little bit more detail about some of the cases that we have worked on together. In our strategic prevention stream, we have a variety of initiatives underway. And as I said, the way we design these initiatives is when we hear from our members about common issues that we have across all our government payment programs. And we try to design whole of government solutions that can help with fraud prevention across all of us. So I've included 3 examples here. The first one is all about work we're doing with the ATO to encourage reporting of government payment program income by government payment program service providers and their tax agents. So you might have already seen some of this messaging. The ATO has started notifying targeted groups of businesses, making it known to them that they should be declaring income that they may be receiving through government. They are using the tagline, making it easier to do the right thing and hard for those who choose not to. We also, other than the TPB, which I already mentioned, we are also using other partnerships to target other professionals. So, for example, it might be medical professionals or allied health professionals who could be facilitating fraud in the NDIS or other programs, excuse me, like, for example, Department of Veterans Affairs or Medicare. If medical professionals are writing false reports for the purposes of getting people access into government programs or increasing what they can get in the NDIS plan, for example, we will work directly with regulators in that regard and also seek to have them removed by being removed from their professional organisation and professional credentials. So we really do have great opportunities through the Fraud Fusion Taskforce to really develop all those unique partnerships for different kinds of professionals who may be threats to our programs. And our third example that we've got here is publication standards. So this is all about standardising the way we report on the any action that might have been taken against an individual or an entity in your program, and making sure that we report it in a standardised way and in a standardised place, so that when other government programs might be considering allowing that person to enrol or register in their program, they can go back and easily check that they don't have a history of fraud or non-compliance in another program. So I'll close out with a few reflections just to say that we really have matured a lot across the Commonwealth Government by working together, and we know that collaboration has the potential to deliver real results, but we've actually been able to bring that to life and get some incredible results already in our operational and intelligence realm. But also we're really starting to see some of those strategic prevention initiatives coming to life as well. Through the FFT model, we are progressively strengthening Australia's ability to prevent, detect and respond to fraud. And we have created a new benchmark, I think, that will continue to grow in future years. We now have better ways and methods of sharing data and intelligence early and ethically across agencies, and we will continue to build on that and ensure we can be as joined up as possible. Our motto here in the NDIA fraud and integrity space is we want to make it easier to get it right and harder to get it wrong by increasingly building systems that make it harder and harder, ideally impossible, to do the wrong thing. And that's a journey that we're on in our agency and also through our whole of government work. And so I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about Fraud Fusion Taskforce. We will hear from Peter now, but there's some information here if you want to understand more about the ATO side and the TPB side. But also if you have an interest in NDIS, there'll be a link right there about information for NDIS providers, but also if you want to make a tip-off or share something that you're seeing, we really welcome receiving those tip-offs, and all the tip-offs are reviewed and followed up. So we'd appreciate your engagement on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kitsa, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. as I think you can understand from the outline that Kits has given us of the work of the Fraud Fusion Taskforce and how it relates to the National Disability Insurance Scheme, we're in a set of circumstances where it's clear that as government entities and regulators, there's a need for cooperation and coordination between all of us. So the TPB comes into play for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that tax agents and accountants have a strong role in assisting their clients, not only with their tax matters, but also in relation to a lot of NDIS matters. And I think it's quite clear from what we've heard with a program as large as the NDIA or NDIS, there is scope for people who are prepared to do the wrong thing to take advantage and commit acts of fraud. So I think it's really important for us to set out what our role is at the TPB. And firstly, that is to say that we're committed to working across government. We're committed to the integrity of the tax profession. We're committed to the idea that tax practitioners can provide services and strengthen their procedures in providing services. And we're committed to the idea that taxpayers' money goes to where it is supposed to go to, rather than being taken out of the system through fraud. So a big part of our role is to work closely through the Fraud Fusion Taskforce with the other agencies. We share information, we analyse data, we spot patterns and trends that may signal fraud. And we're working very hard to build stronger controls to take action where tax practitioners do help to facilitate fraud. And as I always do when talking to practitioners, it's really important to note that the vast majority of tax practitioners are doing the right thing and are operating in a professional and ethical manner. But when there is so much money at stake, there are clearly a small proportion of people who are very prepared to do the wrong thing. And that's why it makes the work of the Fraud Fusion Taskforce extremely important. So I want to move forward into how practitioners can help. And firstly, in the event that in your own practice you suspect that somebody else is committing some sort of fraud, it is important to do something about it. We strongly encourage you to report suspicious behaviour, and that can be done either using the National Disability Insurance Agency fraud reporting form, which is available on the NDIA website. And you can also use the complaints form on the TPB website if you have any trouble with that. But really, simply reporting it doesn't stop there. So if you are aware of a practitioner who is involved in poor conduct or fraud, you do actually have the power to make some difference. Every report matters, and it's about fraud or professional conduct. Your actions help us to maintain a level playing field for all practitioners, because those practitioners who are prepared to do the wrong thing really are making it much harder for the honest ones. So importantly, I will stress for all registered tax practitioners, tax agents and BAS agents, you do have responsibilities under the new Code of Professional Conduct, in particular in relation to breach reporting. So let's unpack the breach reporting obligations a bit more specifically. So as you're all aware by now, the breach reporting obligations came into effect from 1 July 2024, so they are currently in operation. There are two types of breach reporting. The first one of those is self-reporting. So under this requirement, you as a registered practitioner have an obligation to advise the TPB if you are aware that you've breached the Code of Conduct and if that breach is a significant breach of the Code of Conduct. And I can clearly state to you that fraudulent activity in relation to the NDIA is a significant breach. The second type of reporting is where you report another practitioner. Here, if you have reasonable grounds to believe that another tax practitioner has breached the Code of Conduct and that breach is a significant breach, then you are obligated to report that practitioner to the TPB and to their own recognised professional association if you have reasonable grounds to understand that they are a member of such an association. Now, I do want to stress If you are not certain that a breach is a significant breach of the code, but have reasonable grounds to believe it is, you should still report it. Reasonable grounds means having a solid factual basis supported by appropriate facts and some evidence. It doesn't mean hearsay or unsubstantiated opinions. It is genuinely an objective test which looks at whether a reasonable person in your position would form the same belief in the same circumstances. Whilst you don't need conclusive proof, but you should be able to appropriately substantiate your claim and the reasons that you're making that claim. We genuinely understand that making notification about another practitioner can be a sensitive matter and can be difficult, especially when they are an associate or a colleague that's well known to you. It is also important to stress that you should not make reports that are frivolous, vexatious, or malicious. If we do find people making those sort of complaints, it is possible that we may take action against the complainant. So let's talk a little bit about the consequences of failing to comply with your obligations under the breach reporting matters. So it is the level of sanctions available to us. So I will stress two things: that failing to comply with your breach reporting obligations is an offence under the Tax Administration Act of 1953, and it's also a specific breach of the Code of Conduct and a general breach of Code Item 2, which requires all tax practitioners to comply with the taxation laws in the conduct of their own personal affairs. So for breaches that should have been reported that aren't reported, there's a range of cautions, from a written caution through to an order to undertake some specific training, for instance, through to a suspension of your registration, or potentially, in the most serious of cases, a termination, which can include a period in which a terminated practitioner may not apply for re-registration. So I just really want to stress it is important to think about your breach reporting obligations, especially in relation to fraudulent activities around the NDIS. We understand that in a scheme like the NDIS, it's a large bucket of government money, and some people are quite willing to stick their hands in it. If you're in a position where you have reasonable grounds to believe that another practitioner is behaving inappropriately in relation to the NDIS, you should definitely report that to us. And if it's happening in your own practice, again, I say you should definitely report that to the TPB. I've got a couple of case studies to move on to just to illustrate a couple of actual cases that have been worked up through the Fraud Fusion Taskforce in cooperation with the NDIA and other regulators, and have ended up in board conduct committee cases at the TPB. The first of these cases is the case of Katan Al Hassan. We terminated his tax agent registration and imposed a 5-year ban for unethical conduct. He breached the Code of Conduct in specific items, and we also found that he was no longer a fit and proper person to be a registered tax agent. So in relation to the TPB TASA Code of Conduct, he failed to correctly prepare and lodge business activity statements. He failed to notify the TPB that he had been permanently banned by the NDIS. He failed to lodge several income tax returns in relation to his own affairs and failed to pay his tax debts on time. He failed to notify the TPB that his company was in external administration, i.e. an insolvency. He had failed to complete his own CPE and he had failed to maintain adequate professional indemnity insurance. So around all of these circumstances, and I think Kitzer identified earlier, that we find where practitioners have these sort of problems, it tends to spread wider than just their personal affairs. It spreads into how they look after their clients and how they interact with other government agencies, and in this case, fraudulent activity with the NDIS. So under these circumstances, it was decided to terminate Mr. Al Hassan's registration and take him out of both the tax profession, as well as being able to be an NDIS agent. So let's have a look at case study number 2. Again, this relates to Mr. Rahil Chowdhury. We terminated his registration, and again, we imposed the full 5-year ban. Mr. Chowdhury had failed to meet his own tax obligations. He had misled the TPB in relation to his own tax obligations. He had outstanding tax debts of more than $1.5 million, in relation to which there was no payment plans in place. And we also considered the evidence led by the NDIS scheme, the NDIA, which caused them to ban him from delivering any NDIS services for 5 years. And I think these cases illustrate that people who are, prepared to do the wrong thing in their own personal tax affairs, in the way they handle their clients' affairs, in their own lack of competence and honesty, that tends to spread right across the whole of their professional activities. And it's completely appropriate for us to take this level of regulatory action. So I really want to just close out now by talking about I think you can see from these case studies, and you can see from the outline that we've been given of the Fraud Fusion Taskforce, how important it is for government regulators and agencies to work together, to share information and to send clear messages. I think the message that we're definitely trying to give is that whilst we are comfortable that the majority of you behave in appropriate ethical fashions, we are working very hard and in a very coordinated fashion to find those people who aren't prepared to operate in accordance with the law. The new breach reporting requirements and obligations on tax agents are part of that, and it's an important part of your role to keep us up to date on the things that you see happening in your environment. And clearly, by embracing these obligations together, we can send a clear joint message about the importance of the tax profession, about the importance of honesty, integrity, and ethical behaviour in the profession. That preserves a level playing field for honest practitioners and exposes dishonest practitioners to regulatory action. So let's work together to safeguard the reputation of our profession, protect the public, and build a strong tax system that Australians can rely on. So on that basis, I'll finish up what I've got to say, and happy to take on board any questions. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks so much, Peter, and thank you, Kitsa, for the great presentation that you both gave today. I've got a few questions that have come in, so I might ask the first one of you, Kitsa. We've had one come through from Amanda, and Amanda's asked, does the FFT make recommendations to government regarding bringing service provisions in-house? For example, create a delivery agency employing people to provide actual services to clients.
Thanks for the question. I'll just give you a very brief history of the NDIS, because people on the call might not really understand what it is. If we think back a couple of decades, if you were born with a disability, or if you acquired a disability through an accident or a degenerative disease or something, you might get disability supports from government, but it was usually get in a queue over here for your wheelchair, and then get in a queue over here for a program that might take you out for the day, and get in a queue over here for a worker to come and give you your showers. And so the people with disability, got together and came to government and said, we want to have more choice and control over our lives. We'd prefer a system where the government expenditure went straight to the person with disability, and then they could choose and buy in the open market the supports that were right for them. And they would be able to choose which company to use, and then it was kind of supposed to create this consumer power that would increase the quality of the disability supports available, and lift quality for everyone, and get better value for money out of all that government spend. So I think to your question, we've kind of gone from a world where it was more in-sourced and now it's completely market-based. But I think it's a really important question that you've raised of, is that the right model of delivery that is delivering the best quality and the best value for money? And if you want to know more about where the government is headed on that question, there was a big review, the NDIS review it's called. It delivered its report, I think, around 2 years ago, and it asked those fundamental questions of, have we got that design right, and what might we do to maybe pull back some aspects of that, for example, through better registration of NDIS providers, so it's not such an open market, but a bit more selective of who can be an NDIS provider, and also other things to lift quality and just make some adjustments to that model. So it's an ongoing question, but I don't think we'll go to a world where it's fully in-sourced back into government the way it started.
Great, thank you for that response, Kit. So that's really helpful. The next question I have is for you, Peter, and it's come through from Mohammed. And Mohammed's asked, do we report a taxpayer or a tax practitioner based on suspicion, or do we need to have concrete evidence before we make a report?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. We do expect that you should have some evidence of the matters that you want to report, and I think probably draw the distinction between general, if you heard an allegation at the pub or at a coffee shop or whatever, that's not really strong grounds. But if you are aware through your professional networks that somebody is continuously doing the wrong thing, and you can substantiate the allegation with some level of proof, you've got reasonable grounds to believe that it's happening. And I think there's some of the questions on the chat line are about people losing clients to other accounting firms that are prepared to do the wrong thing. If you've got reasonable understanding that that's happening through discussions with the clients that are leaving you, well, you've probably got reasonable grounds to believe that there's a problem. But I do think that just because somebody says something over a coffee or at the pub that so and so is doing something, that's not reasonable grounds. So it's an objective test. It should be what a reasonable person in your shoes would conclude. The more evidence that you can give us in your complaint, the better we are able to take action about those complaints. And I do think if you're genuinely uncertain about whether you should and you shouldn't, either make the report to the TPB or contact the TPB about the evidence that you have got. And in some circumstances, if you're thinking about making a report and you decide that the evidence isn't good enough or you decide not to, I strongly suggest that you keep a file note of your own considerations, so that if it ever comes up, you can demonstrate to us that you thought about it, you considered X and Y, and you decided not to complain, or you decided to complain. So that there's a good track record of how you've gotten to this decision you've made.
That's great. Thank you for that advice, Peter. That's helpful as well. I just wanted to ask you one other question that's come through. You spoke about the breach reporting obligations, and we know that that's now in place for all tax practitioners. There's a question around the significant breach aspect of breach reporting. Would you be able to just give some advice on how you define what a significant breach actually is?
Yeah, I think a significant breach should be taken in relation to the context of the breach. So something that is significant to me or an individual taxpayer might not be significant to the government. Something that's significant to the whole of the system would be, for instance, an NDIS fraud scheme or an R&D fraud scheme. That's significant to the whole system. But something that's significant to an individual client could be, a matter of thousands of dollars. So you sit there and say, if you've got a tax agent that's working through and repetitively overclaiming work-related deductions that aren't able to be substantiated for all of their clients, for $1,000 for every client, for 500 clients, all considered all together, those repeated small acts become a significant breach. I really want to stress that we're not thinking about significant breaches when agents make the odd mistake. We're talking about agents who maliciously or negligently consistently breach the rules. Okay.
Great, thank you, Peter. Kit, so I'll come back to you now, and I've got a question here that's come through from Hillary asking, has the NDIA considered introducing obligations under TPAR, which is the, let me just find out what that means. It's the Taxable Payments Annual Report for payments made to all providers, registered and unregistered?
Can't speak to THAR personally. I'm just not across the detail of that. What I can say is that we are very focused on examining how we can get better visibility as a government of the payments that businesses might be receiving from government payment programs, and ensuring that they are reported correctly. And so, as I mentioned, there's a program underway through the ATO at the moment under our strategic prevention stream of work. And it's to support service providers who are receiving government payments to meet their tax, super and registration obligations. So we're piloting at the moment a project to educate and support service providers to encourage them to actively report their government payment income. So there will be prompts to these in-scope providers saying, if you are a government services provider, this is what you're expected to do, report your GPP income. There's education about how to correctly report that. And also to inform these providers that their GPP data has been shared with the ATO by government agencies. And so it's a pilot at the moment of that awareness raising and education, and we will continue to build on that as much as we can. But we'll take your suggestion about THAR and further the conversation with ATO about how that might come to life.
Thanks, Kitsa. Peter, back to you. I've got a question now from Simone. Simone's asking, is there an obligation under the code to report a non-tax agent offering tax agent services?
There's not a specific obligation under the code to report unregistered practice, but I really strongly encourage anybody who's aware of unregistered practitioners in the marketplace to report it to us. It's a critical piece of consumer protection that we don't have unregistered practitioners in the marketplace. It distorts the level playing field for those of you who do the right thing, get registered, pay your PII, do your CPE, because these people are just operating outside of that system and competing with you unfairly. So I strongly encourage you to report those sort of things and give us as much evidence as you possibly can. We take unregistered practice very seriously, and we will always act on those referrals that you can make to us.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. And we'll send a link out after the webinar today with some hyperlinks on where you can make reports, both to the TPB and to the Fraud Fusion Taskforce. And also there's some other links that we'll send out around ATO reports and things like that as well, which will help people. The next question I've got, Peter, again is for you. It's from Bjorn, and just going back to those case studies that you shared today, the comment is that, they've only received a 5-year ban. The question is, should they also receive criminal charges or some other sort of offence related to those actions that have happened? Yeah,
thanks, Julie. And as I think most of you are aware, the current situation is that the longest ban we can impose legally is 5 years. There's a bit of work being done with Treasury and Government at the moment about increasing the capabilities of our sanctions regime, and it is proposed that there will be a 10-year term. Now, when we get to these cases that involve actual fraud that, has been proven by the NDIA or can be proven by a TPB investigation, we refer those cases on either to the AFP or to state police forces, and there are a large number of those cases will be taken on by the police, and criminal sanctions will be imposed where the evidence supports those sanctions. We're talking today here about what the TPB's done about these things, but I can promise you in relation to those two cases, there will be definite consideration given to criminal penalties because there has been provable fraud undertaken in both cases.
Thank you, Peter. Kit, so I've got a question that's come through from Lucy today, and Lucy's asked, when it comes to making a report about fraud to the FFT, what level of evidence is required?
The best that you can give us will be accepted. So we have a form to fill out now. It used to be a phone number and an email address. So what we used to receive was quite unstructured, but there's now a form. So we really encourage you to use that form, and it will ask you a structured set of questions, including some drop-down menus and some guided free text fields. And then you can indicate there what evidence you might have to substantiate what you're setting out in the tip-off. You can also then request a call back, and someone from our tip-off team could call you about that, and you can talk through it and follow up with any further evidence that you have. But I'd encourage you, even if you don't have investigation quality evidence, what we're looking for is that intelligence, because sometimes we might already have a really big file already underway on a certain network or person or entity, and that extra piece of information that you give us, no matter how small, might help us join the dots on that. So I'd encourage you to report.
Excellent, thank you for that. Peter, the next question I've got is around the whistleblower laws, and this question is asking if you are a whistleblower, are you also required to report the breach to the person's professional body, so if they're a member of a recognised professional association?
Julie, I can't give you a definitive answer on that, but I believe the answer is yes. And I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. But where you are an eligible whistleblower, if you just need to check that the recipient of the complaint is an eligible whistleblower recipient. Now, if that's not the case, I think you can make the whistleblower complaint to us or to the ATO, and I'm pretty sure the NDIA is an eligible recipient, and be covered by the whistleblower protections. If the recognised professional association isn't an eligible recipient, then you wouldn't be required to also make that report. But I think you should let us know that you're not making that report.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Kit, so I have another question for you that's come through from Ashley today. And Ashley's asking, how does the task force address the growing complexity of fraud, particularly with the use of digital technology?
Great question. It's one of the reasons why it absolutely is so important that we have come together as a task force, because staying ahead of the increased sophistication of those who want to defraud our programs is really hard when you're on your own as an individual agency. But it becomes much easier and more effective when we all sharing capability, and across our 24 Fraud Fusion Taskforce agencies now, we all have access to a great baseline of capability across all of us. in different ways. So, for example, we all have access to the Australian Criminal Intelligence Centre, the ACIC. They run a special program called the Fraud Fusion Centre for us, and we can all tip our data into there. The ACIC will look for patterns and for common targets, and can use its powers on any of our matters. And then we share the reports out of the ACIC back to individual agencies or multiple agencies. We also have access to incredible capability from Services Australia through their digital forensics unit. Digital forensics is one of those things that you wouldn't want to set up 50 times in 50 different agencies, but because we have a centre of excellence in Services Australia that's complemented by capabilities, for example, in NDIA and some other places, we can really drive a high level of sophistication that helps us stay ahead. And so we're really conscious that it's an ongoing task to stay ahead of those trends. I'm really confident that with our combined strength as the Australian government group of agencies, we can stay ahead of that. And so I think it's just, again, been a game changer that we now have those methods in place to work together, and we can meet the challenge that we're facing.
Thank you so much for that, Kitsa. We've got about 4 minutes left to go. So what I might do is ask one more question of you both, and then we might just go to closing remarks, if that's okay. So, Kitsa, the last one for you has come through from Roger. And Roger said, is there a minimum dollar amount of fraud before it gets investigated? For example, could it be 10,000 versus 100,000?
There's no minimum level of fraud, so we don't set a dollar benchmark. However, we do take a risk proportionate approach when choosing which of our compliance treatments to apply. So that might take into consideration the amount of money, but also the risk and safeguarding risk to participants that's in play. It might take into account the number of tip-offs received and over what amount of time. And so we understandably have to have a really varied approach to all our cases, because we do get 30,000 tip-offs a year, which turns into many, many thousands of cases. And we have different teams in the compliance space, and then also into the fraud investigation space that will apply different levels of investigation, administrative or criminal or other compliance treatments as required. But I think what I can say confidently is that one of my big priorities is to make sure that no tip-off that we get is ignored, no tip-off is too small, that we do find some treatment that we can take for everything we receive. And so, again, I'd encourage you to let us know if you're seeing something, even if you think the amount is small. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. So Peter, over to you for the last question of the day, which has come through from Chloe. And Chloe's asking, if the TPB finds a tax practitioner has assisted fraud and is subsequently banned by the TPB as practicing as a tax agent, can they still work for another agent?
Thanks for that question. So once practitioners had their registration terminated by the TPB, they become a disqualified entity. And there's a system in place whereby if another registered agent wants to employ that person, they have to apply to the TPB for approval to make that employment arrangement. In circumstances where somebody has been terminated for reasons of fraud, lack of honesty and integrity, and reckless or deliberate abuse of the system, it's pretty unlikely that we would give that approval. That approval is normally limited to circumstances where people may have perhaps been terminated by virtue of a personal bankruptcy that wasn't related to the way they conducted themselves as a tax practitioner. It might be marriage breakdowns, or it might be an unsuccessful other business or something. In those circumstances, we can see that the person's capable of working in the profession if properly supervised. But the purposes of our regulatory action when we are terminating a practitioner for material breaches of the code is to take them out of the tax system. And I think that's a really important message. If you're terminated for fraud or misconduct, we're taking you out of the system quite purposefully. And I think if I can just round off a couple of comments in relation to how we operate as a regulator. We use risk-based methodologies to try and regulate in a way that influences the system, that makes it clear that unethical, dishonest, unprofessional ethical behaviour won't be tolerated. But there can be instances where the worst behaviour is about $1,000 or $2,000 or something small. If we see really bad behaviour at a low level, we'll do something about it. But it's about sitting there saying if we've got the evidence and we see real bad behaviour, we're happy to do it at the smaller end as well as the larger end because it influences the system. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Peter. Great way to finish up today. So just in finishing off, we're just going to share a little bit of information on how you can stay in touch with the TPB. So you can jump on our website at tpb.gov.au. You can also follow us on socials on LinkedIn and Facebook. We've also got a monthly newsletter, TPB e-News, so I highly recommend that you subscribe to that on our website also. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel where we have a comprehensive library of all of our recorded webinars, and you can view those at any time and you can still claim continuing professional education for doing so. I just wanted to finish off by saying a big thank you to everyone who was supporting us in the chat today. Thank you also to Peter and to Kitsa for your great presentations. It was really beneficial for our audience to hear from you both today. And if you are interested in attending some more of our webinars, we'll have some scheduled for next year. So just go onto our website and have a look at tpb.gov.au/webinars. And just finally, before we do finish up, we'll be launching an exit survey, and we would really appreciate it if you could just take the time to complete that. Super quick, only takes a moment, but it also just helps us understand ways that we can improve, and also let us know if there's any topics that you're interested in hearing about next year, and we'll get those put into our program of work. So once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.